What if the most ancient Europeans, the ones who lived here before farmers, before empires, are still inside us, hiding in plain sight? The story begins in the eastern Baltic, between today's Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. From 7,500 to 5000 BCE, the land was ruled by the Kunda and Narva cultures, hunter-gatherers who thrived on rivers, forests, and the endless coastlines of the Baltic Sea. They carved bone tools, fished salmon-rich rivers, and left behind pottery unlike anything in Western Europe. But their greatest legacy isn't found in pots or tools, it's in their DNA. Scientists studying ancient genomes discovered that these early Balts carried extraordinarily high levels of Western hunter-gatherer, WHG, and Eastern hunter-gatherer, EHG ancestry. In fact, modern Eastern Baltic populations still preserve the highest fraction of WHG DNA in Europe, a genetic memory almost unchanged for thousands of years. Now, here's the contradiction that stuns archaeologists. Across Central Europe, by 6500 BCE, farmers from Anatolia surged northward, carrying wheat, sheep, cattle, and a brand new way of life. They didn't just share ideas, they replaced entire populations. Ancient genomes show how foragers in Germany, Poland and France were swallowed into this new agricultural wave. But the Baltic resisted. Around 4000 BCE, farming finally appeared here, but not through conquest, not through settlers. Archaeology proves it was cultural diffusion. Baltic hunter-gatherers learned agriculture, yet their DNA remained untouched. They shaped new pottery, adopted crops, but beneath it all, they stayed genetically the same. While the rest of Europe transformed, the Baltic became a genetic time capsule, a living archive of Europe's first peoples. This is why scientists call the Baltic unique. Nowhere else on the continent do we see such continuity, an unbroken line from Mesolithic foragers to modern populations. A people who resisted the greatest demographic revolution in European history. But no wall lasts forever, because around 3000 BCE the seal finally cracked. And when outsiders came, they weren't peaceful farmers with ploughs and seeds. They were warriors from the steppe. Imagine the ground itself rumbling with hooves, bringing not just people, but a new world of language, power, and bloodlines. The year is around 3000 BCE. The forests and rivers of the Baltic, untouched for millennia, hear a new sound. Across the horizon, a tide of strangers arrives. They are not farmers, not traders. They are horse-riding pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Men who will forever alter the fate of Europe. Archaeologists know them by their burials. Simple graves, yet with battle axes, pottery and weapons, the mark of the corded ware culture. But DNA reveals their deeper secret. These people carried the unmistakable genetic imprint of the Yamnaya herders, the same force sweeping into Central Europe at this exact time. The genetic shock is unmistakable. Ancient remains from Estonia and Latvia suddenly show over 60 to 70% steppe ancestry. And this wasn't a slow trickle, it was fast, explosive. Within only a few generations, the old Mesolithic genome, the one that resisted Anatolian farmers for thousands of years, was broken open, and the signatures point to something extraordinary. The Y chromosome records show the rise of haplogroup R1a, a male-driven migration. It wasn't entire families moving, it was steppe men taking local women, leaving behind children who carried their blood, their culture, their language. Unlike Central Europe, there is no trace of Anatolian farmers in these genomes, no hybrid signal. The migration here was direct. Steppe to the Baltic, no middlemen, no detours. A pure transfer of bloodlines from the open grasslands into the dark forests of the north. And with those bloodlines came words. The oldest hints of Balto-Slavic languages trace back to this exact moment. The steppe riders didn't just bring cattle or wagons or bronze tools, they brought a tongue that still echoes in the Baltic today, a linguistic empire born on horseback. Yet this was only the beginning, because if the steppe warriors were only wanderers, their story might have ended here. But evidence suggests otherwise. What if these were not just migrants, but the messengers of an empire with no walls, no king, and no name? What if the greatest empire in Europe never built a single city, never carved a single monument, and yet still rules inside your blood today? Here is the twist. The steppe warriors were not just wanderers. They were the vanguard of something far larger, a prehistoric empire without kings, without borders, without stone or bronze walls. Archaeologists call them the Yamnaya culture, rising between 3,300 and 2,600 BCE on the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Unlike the empires of Egypt or Mesopotamia, they left behind no palaces. Their story lay buried in kurgans, pit graves, simple mounds of earth stretching from the Black Sea to the Urals. But paleogenomics cracked their secret. When scientists sequenced their DNA, the shock was undeniable. The Yamnaya were a fusion, a new people forged from Eastern hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers, two ancient worlds combining into a genetic storm. And then the eruption. Around 3000 BCE, from a population of only a few thousand, the Yamnaya exploded outward. Within a few centuries they stretched across Eurasia. Their wagons cut tracks from the Danube to Siberia, from Hungary to western China. By 2500 BCE, their genetic fingerprint dominated Europe. This was not migration. It was a demographic revolution. The evidence is overwhelming. The corded Ware horizon, 2800 to 2300 BCE, spanning Poland to the Baltics, shows up to 75% Yamnaya ancestry. A continent transformed in less than 5 generations. Their genes became Europe's foundation. Their tongue, the ancestor of Indo-European languages, spread from the Baltic forests to the plains of India. But here lies the most shocking twist. Because the Baltic resisted Anatolian farmers, it preserved a pure genetic baseline. And into that untouched world, the Yamnaya signal shines brighter than anywhere else. Modern Eastern Balts today carry the clearest, undiluted memory of this empire, not in ruins, not in monuments, but in their chromosomes. This was the empire with no crown. The invisible conquerors, the true, forgotten empire of Europe. And yet, science found one moment, one grave, where this invisible empire became undeniable. Because in a single Baltic burial lies the proof, the instant this empire rewrote the timeline of human history. Sometimes, a single skeleton can change the story of an entire continent. That grave was the turning point. Buried deep in the soil of Latvia and Estonia, a body lay silent for nearly 5,000 years. To the naked eye, nothing about it seemed unusual, but when scientists cracked its genome, they saw the moment Europe itself had changed. For millennia, every burial in the Baltic told the same story. Pure Mesolithic hunter-gatherer DNA, stretching back to 7,500 BCE. A genetic continuity so stubborn it survived while the rest of Europe fell under the wave of Anatolian farmers between 6,500 and 4,000 BCE. The Baltic had stood apart, a fortress of the Old World, but in this grave the walls finally fell. For the first time, the genetic signature of the Pontic-Caspian steppe appeared. One man, one skeleton, carrying the blood of riders from the open grasslands. His genome was the line across history. Before him, untouched foragers, unchanged for thousands of years. After him, an avalanche of steppe ancestry surging across the Baltic until it dominated the population by the early Bronze Age around 2300 BCE. Scientists describe it as the clearest before and after in all of ancient Europe. This wasn't a trickle of traders. It wasn't a slow, quiet merging. It was rupture, an invasion written directly into the genome. And because the Baltic had resisted that first farming wave, the second wave stands out here in perfect clarity. No blurred lines, no half signals, just a clean break, like a time lapse where the world suddenly changes colour. That grave is proof that Europe's destiny was rewritten not once, but twice. First by Near Eastern farmers, then by steppe herders. And in the Baltic you can see the contrast sharper than anywhere else on Earth. But bloodlines were only the beginning. These warriors didn't just bring horses, or wagons, or battle axes. They carried something more dangerous, more lasting than bronze itself. A weapon called language. What if your mother tongue was born not in villages, but on horseback? That weapon was proto-Indo-European, the ancestral language carried by the Yamnaya riders around 3300 to 2600 BCE. Unlike the languages of early farmers, tied to ploughs and fields, this one spread with speed, with hoofs, with war. It became the linguistic bloodline of half the world. The Kurgan hypothesis, one of the most supported ideas in historical linguistics, places the origin of Proto-Indo-European right here, in the steppe world of wagons, horses and pit graves. And as the Yamnaya merged with the corded ware culture, 2800 to 2300 BCE in the Baltic and beyond, their words fractured into branches, Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, tongues that still shape Europe today. The proof lies not only in bones, but in living speech. Genetic studies reveal a startling truth. Modern Baltic populations share stronger genetic ties with Indo-European speaking South Asians than with their own non-Indo-European neighbours. The echo of the steppe riders runs deeper than borders. It runs through syntax, through grammar, through the songs whispered across centuries. Every word we speak is a fossil. The grammar of Balto-Slavic languages, the cases, the endings, the archaic structures, makes them one of the oldest surviving branches of Indo-European speech. They preserve ancient forms, lost in most other tongues. Listen closely, and you can almost hear the cadence of those horsemen, the rhythm of their chants carried across the grasslands. This is the hidden empire of the steppe, not carved in stone, not written on tablets, but carried in our myths, our prayers, our lullabies. Their DNA shaped our bodies, but their language shaped our souls. And yet, this was not the final chapter, because centuries later, a different wave would arrive, not from the south, not from the steppe, but from the northeast. They carried no empire, but they left an Asian fingerprint on the Baltic genome that still lingers today. What if a piece of your DNA came from thousands of kilometers away, from the frozen forests of Siberia? That fingerprint was no illusion. After nearly 5 millennia of foragers, farmers, and steppe riders shaping the Baltic, a new bloodline appeared. Sudden, foreign, unexpected. Around 500 BCE, geneticists uncovered something that had never been present before, haplogroup N, a paternal lineage tied not to Europe, not to the steppe, but to the vast taiga of Siberia and the Uralic homeland. This was no small detail. Haplogroup N is the defining marker of the Finno-Ugric peoples, the ancestors of those who spoke the earliest Uralic languages. They came not as armies, but as waves of migration drifting west from the Ob and Yenisei river basins, carrying with them traces of East Eurasian ancestry. Their DNA whispered of ancestors who had hunted in the Arctic, who had followed the reindeer herds, who had lived in a world of endless snow. The Baltic became a crossroads like no other. In Estonia we see the fusion most clearly. The Finnic tongue, layered over the steppe inheritance of the corded ware, and still anchored to the ancient forager substratum that had never truly disappeared. By this moment in history, the Baltic genome had become a palimpsest. Hunter-gatherers, farmers, steppe warriors, and now the shadows of Siberia. It is a haunting reminder. Your DNA doesn't just belong to the soil beneath your feet, it can carry the ghosts of ancestors who lived on another continent. Even today, modern Estonians carry East Asian-related DNA signals, fragments that their Stone Age ancestors never possessed. It is proof that identity is never still. It is an ocean, always receiving new rivers. But just when the Baltic had absorbed the whispers of the forest peoples, another storm was approaching. Not from Siberia, not from the steppe, but from the sea. Soon, ships with dragon heads would arrive, bringing warriors who were both kin and conquerors. What if the raiders who terrorized your coast shared your blood? When the Viking Age erupted between 800 and 1050 CE, the Baltic was no longer a quiet frontier. From the misty fjords of Scandinavia came fleets with dragon-headed ships, cutting across the sea like blades. To Europe, these men were raiders, pillagers of monasteries, burners of towns. But in the Baltic, the story was stranger. Because the DNA says something chilling. The Vikings were not just invaders, they were kin. Excavations from Viking graves in Poland and Latvia reveal a truth that history never told. The bones inside carried a mixture of Nordic and Baltic ancestry, proof that the bloodline of the raider and the bloodline of the raided were the same. The sword was raised against brothers, cousins, distant kin. And yet, the very same graves also tell of marriage, trade and alliance. The Baltic was rich not only in soil, but in treasure. Amber, the gold of the north, flowed out of these coasts into the hands of Mediterranean merchants. Through Viking routes, Baltic traders connected to Byzantium, the Islamic world, even North Africa. In this age, the Baltic was not a backwater, it was a hub, alive with exchange. So who were the Baltic peoples in the age of the Vikings? Victims? Yes, when villages burned. Partners? Yes, when amber changed hands. Warriors? Yes, when their own joined Viking raids as equals. The line between Viking and Baltic blurred until it almost disappeared. The same blood flowed on both sides of the sword. But as the sails of the long ships began to vanish from the horizon, a new threat gathered. It did not come with merchants' trade, nor with warriors' axes. It came with crosses, with crusades, and with an empire that sought not to trade with the Baltics, but to erase them. What if faith and fire can conquer castles, but never conquer DNA? The crosses arrived with armies. By the 13th century CE, the Germanic Livonian crusaders marched into the Baltic, blessed by the Pope, and armed with both sword and scripture. Their goal was not trade nor alliance, it was conquest by faith. Pagan sanctuaries were torn down, holy groves cut and burned, hill forts dismantled stone by stone. On their ashes rose churches, monasteries, castles, symbols of a new world order. The Baltics bled. The Livonian brothers of the sword, followed later by the Teutonic Knights, waged wars that scarred the land for centuries. By the 15th century CE, the Great Hanseatic League controlled Baltic trade, flooding Riga, Tallinn and Klaipėda with German merchants, silver coins and Western luxuries. On the surface, it seemed as though the Baltic had been remade in the image of the West. But beneath that surface, science tells another story. Genetic studies show that despite centuries of Germanic and Slavic presence, the core Baltic DNA resisted change. The genome of modern Lithuanians, Latvians and Estonians still carries the ancient blend of hunter-gatherer, steppe and Siberian roots, almost untouched by medieval conquest. Faith can burn temples, fire can raise castles, but bloodlines endure. Archaeology confirms the paradox. Yes, foreign influences marked the material world. Germanic swords, Scandinavian ornaments, Slavic ceramics, hill forts bear scars of siege, and burial sites reveal Christian rituals. Yet in the bones themselves, the story is different. The Baltic genome remained unbroken, immune to the empire of crosses. Conquerors came and went, but their genetic empire never took hold. And so a question lingers in the shadows of history. If armies could not erase them, if centuries of conquest could not rewrite their blood, then what deeper force was the Baltic carrying forward? So why do some whisper of a hidden Baltic empire? Could DNA hold a secret the chronicles never wrote? What if the greatest mystery of the Baltic is that the empire we've been chasing was never real? For years, whispers of a forgotten Baltic empire have circled through books, documentaries and media headlines. A vanished kingdom of warriors, a hidden power that left no ruins, no chronicles, no monuments. An empire remembered only in legend. But science has a way of stripping myth down to its bones, and in this case, to its DNA. When geneticists mapped the ancient Baltic genome, the results were clear and shocking. Every great shift in Baltic DNA aligns with migrations we already know. The hunter-gatherers of 7,500 BCE, the farmers of 4,000 BCE, the Yamnaya riders of 3,000 BCE. The Finno-Ugric arrived around 500 BCE. The Viking Age, 800 to 1050 CE. The crusaders of the 13th century. Each layer leaves a trace, each migration a mark. But what paleogenomics does not reveal is a unique, isolated cluster. No signature of a hidden dynasty. No genetic fingerprint of a lost state. And that is the irony. The very absence of a Baltic empire makes the Baltic identity even more extraordinary. Because unlike Rome, which rose and fell, or the Mongols, who left a trail of bones across continents, the Baltic story is not about a single crown or throne. It is about survival without centralization, power without empire. A mosaic of bloodlines that never needed one king to endure. Still, a question lingers like smoke. If there was no empire, then why does the Baltic genome remain the clearest time capsule of Europe's deepest past? Why here, on these coasts, do the echoes of hunter-gatherers, steppe riders, and Siberian nomads remain sharper than anywhere else in the world? The answer may lie not in what was built above the ground, but in what still sleeps beneath it. If kingdoms fall and monuments crumble, what if DNA is the only true archive of humanity? What sleeps beneath is not stone, not treasure, but blood, a record written in the body itself. And nowhere in Europe does that record run deeper, clearer, and more unbroken than in the Baltic. The genome here is a time capsule. It carries the echoes of two great waves that forged Europe. The hunter-gatherer continuity stretching back to 7,500 BCE, and the steppe invasion around 3000 BCE that redrew the continent's bloodlines. In Central and Western Europe, layers of farmers, conquerors, and migrations blurred the picture. But in the Baltic, the lines remain sharp. It is like looking at the original draft of Europe's genetic story, unedited, uncensored. Even when kingdoms rose, they could not overwrite it. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the 14th century became the largest state in Europe, stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. It left castles, chronicles, and fleeting power. But in the DNA of its people, its mark was faint. Even the mightiest medieval state could not erase what had already been carried for thousands of years. And that is the final irony. Empires rise and they fall. Monuments weather into dust. Scriptures fade. Languages shift. But genes endure, longer than walls, longer than crowns, longer than memory itself. Yet the Baltic is not the only place where forgotten legacies sleep. In the shadows of history lie the Thracians, the Scythians, the Anatolians, civilizations erased from maps, yet alive in blood. Their stories too are waiting to be uncovered, strand by strand. If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe for more untold stories. Because history isn't just written, it's inherited.